It's 900 hours Central African time, and you know it's time for your favorite Sunday morning program. That's Media Monitor with myself, Alicia Jali. Thank you so much for choosing us. We are coming to you live here on the SABC News channel from Auckland Park. It is time to bring you up to speed with what is making news headlines at this hour. The African Union is sending 200 monitors to the troubled Central African country of Burundi to stem the ongoing security crisis there. President Jacob Zuma has just returned from Burundi on a high-level talks to try bring about peace in the country. While it was glitz and glamour at this year's Metro FM Awards in Durban, biggest winner for the night from Matatiele was rapper MT, who won a total of 400,000 rands in prizes, and of course Song of the Year that was won by Nati with that mesmerizing song Nomvula. 45-year-old Italian Gianni Infantino has been elected as the new president of the World Football governing body FIFA. All right, let's now have a look at some of the front pages of our Sunday newspapers. The Sunday Times there is leading with a headline, "It's war," suggesting that there's a serious tension between President Zuma and incumbent Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan. It goes to further allege that the president might have to choose between the minister and the tax boss. The City Press there leads with the same story, but the headline reads, "Zuma in on Pravin probe," but their angle is the Hawks saying that they're pretty confident that they have a strong case against the finance minister. The article further alleges that President Zuma is said to believe that Gordhan should cooperate with the investigations fully. All right, the Weekend Argus leads with a story about a woman who stole a baby from hospital, as well as the Gordhan story. And last but not least, the Sunday Tribune also leads with the alleged Gordhan investigation. It seems to be the story of the day in all our Sunday newspapers today. Well, I'm honored to be joined by two remarkable gentlemen in the media fraternity this morning. I'm talking about who will be joining us later, Mr. Mondli Makhanya, as well as media analyst, Mr. Vick, and of course, not forgetting our very own Mr. Aldrin Sampear. Gentlemen, a very good morning to both of you. While we wait for Mondli, let's start the show. A very good morning to both of you.
Morning.
All right, well, we kick off the show now with the story of the day and week, it seems. The said probe into Minister Pravin Gordhan by the Hawks is making news across all media platforms. And our reporter, Aldrin Sampear, has been closely monitoring this story for us. But before we do that, he also covered the now postponed by-elections, and he's here for a quick update. Very quickly, Aldrin.
Well, just quickly on the by-elections that were postponed earlier this week by the IEC. This follows the Electoral Court ruling saying that the elections in 6 wards in Tlokwe should be postponed because the voters' roll was not in order. The IEC then decided to postpone the entire by-elections that were set to take place in 4 different provinces. While where we stand right now at the moment is that chances are, all indications seem to be that the IEC will be heading to the Constitutional Court to get clarity on the order set down by the Constitutional Court last year with regards to the Tlokwe by-elections that took place in 2013. Remember, the Constitutional Court set those results or the elections aside and said there should be a rerun because the voters' roll was not in order. And it seems at this point as well, the Electoral Court is not satisfied with all the mechanisms put in place and the standard of the voters' roll.
All right, so no indication as yet as to whether they'll take place within this year, Aldrin?
Well, chances are that they might take place within this year because remember that we have the municipal elections coming up as well. So the other problem that the IEC is facing right now is whether it will be able to get the voters' roll nationally in order. Remember that the IEC has said that, if I'm not mistaken, more than 60% of residents in the country do not have formal addresses, and this is because of some people living in informal settlements. So it's really difficult to get the voters' roll and those addresses in order.
All right, let's move on now to the story of the day. Chris, what is your take on today's headlines about Mr. Pravin Gordhan being investigated by the Hawks?
It's definitely going to be the story of the year. This thing isn't going to end on Wednesday, which is the deadline for the minister to respond. It's going to run and run, and I think it's probably going to have more impact on national politics and on the economy than the cabinet reshuffle involving former Minister Nene, because it essentially involves a cabinet minister accusing a state agency of undermining or trying to sabotage the economy.
Yes.
It also involves a cabinet minister saying, I cannot be investigated. Because whether we believe in ulterior motives or not, the reality is the Hawks have sent a letter to the minister. They have asked him to answer particular questions. And if he refuses to answer those questions, he's essentially defying a key element of the prosecutorial system. That, for me, is the interesting thing. You know, there are all the undercurrents around how this unit was set up and what the possible implications are. But you've got a very serious standoff now between the Minister of Finance and the Hawks. The presidency has said there are rumors and suspicions, etc. Lutuli House, the ANC, has come out very firmly and said, no, this must not happen. So you've got a really interesting realignment and a positioning going on. And we have to keep asking ourselves why this is happening. Why? Well, I mean, it depends which conspiracy theory you subscribe to. But I mean, the one conspiracy theory is that, in a sense, the finance minister is cutting off some of the financial flows to keep people in business. For example, Minister Ramatlodi was fired under suspicion that he was blocking mining rights for particular individuals. A new minister was appointed who is aligned to the Gupta family. The reshuffle of Des/David Van Rooyen, bringing him in as finance minister, was also seen as a way to influence financial flows from the state to business. And that becomes very problematic because now you've got a situation where there really is this kind of standoff, and it seems to be about who's going to blink first. Is Pravin Gordhan going to blink on Wednesday and agree to meet with the Hawks? If he doesn't blink, what are the Hawks going to do? Are they going to lock him up? Can they do that? What is the president going to do? So there's this huge kind of
there's no middle ground at all. Aldrin, what did you uncover? I know you covered the story on Friday.
Well, certainly, if you read that statement from Pravin Gordhan, saying that he has no answers, or the Hawks have no reason to investigate him. You get that sense, as Chris is saying right now, that here you have a cabinet minister who feels that he's under no obligation to answer to the Hawks, and of course that will seem as though he's undermining this institution, which has been established to investigate some of these issues. And the other thing that you look at, for instance, is that on Friday, when you had these three statements coming out, first it was the ANC, after the ANC we then had Pravin Gordhan, and then the presidency as well, and the president reaffirming, saying that, listen, I still have confidence in Pravin Gordhan. The same came from the ANC. But the strange thing about these statements is that although the story relates to the relationship rather between the SARS commissioner, Tom Moyane, as well as Pravin Gordhan, there's no real mention, though, of Tom Moyane specifically as a SARS commissioner throughout these three statements. We're just referring to SARS. And the other thing that we should look at as well is the KPMG report. Why isn't the KPMG report being released? Tom Moyane, as we understand, wants to release this KPMG report. Pravin Gordhan, when he arrived, when he was reappointed as the finance minister, apparently he said that no, there's no need to release the KPMG report, and that's where the tension really started.
Look, what do you make of the call by COPE to calling for Hawks head and Ntlemeza to be charged with sabotage, Chris?
It's politicking, and I think you're going to see a lot more of that. I think there are more important issues. I mean, if you're a foreign investor and you're looking at South Africa and you saw what happened when Minister Nene was fired, now you see the new finance minister, who presumably foreign investors have more confidence in this massive standoff. That is an issue. That's the real issue I think we should be looking at. But domestically as well, this is really going to impact on stability within SARS. It's going to impact on its ability to recover taxes.
Absolutely.
And if SARS is unable to recover taxes, and if there's public confidence being lost in the institution, we know where that ends up. That means there's less money for service delivery, there's less money for end-of-year parties, we know that, but there's less money for health, education, etc. And that's a real concern, is that this kind of, the clouds that exist within this environment do absolutely nothing for political uncertainty domestically, economic stability inside the country, nor are they going to do anything to rectify the instability that resulted from when Minister Nene was fired. And I think the difficulty with the statement wars that is going on at the moment is, yes, you have a statement coming out on your email from the presidency, from the Lutuli House, etc. This has to go beyond statements. There has to be some kind of leadership. Somebody has to break the impasse that exists, and it's probably the president. And it's an issue that really needs discussion, not email statements, not spokespersons dealing with it. It's a very, very important issue of national and international importance. And people are going to be watching how the president deals with this. Which side does he go? Does he find a middle ground that resolves this issue? Or is the positional war between Minister Gordhan and people within the ANC who back him, and the Hawks and people within SARS who resist him, is that going to continue? Because that's going to be very damaging for South Africa.
Gentlemen, especially Aldrin, I mean, in today's City Press, the Hawks are saying that they're pretty confident that they have a strong case against the minister. What do you think they have on him that we haven't seen already in the previous case?
Well, we should actually go through those 27 questions and see what exactly it is that they say or they believe that they have against the minister. The strange thing about this thing is that you have a cabinet minister who's arguably being implicated in a major scandal, it would seem. And this is not just any cabinet minister, this is the Minister of Finance.
I know.
And if you just look, for instance, what happened last year, when President Jacob Zuma decided to appoint Des van Rooyen and how the economy suffered at that point, one can only imagine how much more the economy would suffer as these investigations continue.
All right. What do you think, Chris? Very quickly.
I think Aldrin's right. We must read the 27 questions. Many of them are innocuous. Do you know when Ivan Pillay retired? Do you know when this unit was set up? A lot of those questions can be answered. I think the irony of this thing, though, is that the media's played a key role, particularly the Sunday newspapers, in getting the story into the public domain. The Sunday Times has been taken to the Press Council for its coverage. City Press has not. They've each taken different positions. But the irony is this started out as being an attempt to portray a team within SARS, the National Research Group, as a rogue unit. And increasingly it's starting to look like SARS itself is a rogue unit in terms of how it's operating. That also doesn't do much for confidence. And I think all the more reason why this impasse needs to be broken. SARS needs to be reined in. The Hawks need to do their work properly rather than issuing summonses to cabinet ministers. Cabinet ministers need to respect, even though there are political undertones, that the Hawks does exist and it does have a mandate to do it. And I think finally the presidency really does need to provide some leadership to break the impasse so that we can get back to dealing with issues of poverty, social injustice, etc.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to leave it there and take a quick ad break. And after that, we look at the ongoing protests in universities across the country. And we have an economist who simplifies the budget speech for us. Please do stay with us.
Searching for the guy who steps up, way up, the queen of the pop and lock, and whatever this is, the party train conductor, all aboard. The answer is yes, you are that guy, and we salute you, party comrade. Join the movement online.
The big news is Newsroom.
We also stream live on YouTube.
Whether you're at home, at the office, or at the gym, wherever you are, Newsroom is right there with you. Bringing you all the latest news, updates, sports, weather, and everything in between. Get all the latest news you need on the go via live streaming on our YouTube channel. That's Newsroom, weekdays at 9 a.m. only on the SABC News Channel.
Welcome back. This is Media Monitor. Do share your views on Twitter now on our topics today at SA Media Monitor. Now, vandalism and property claims of a third force fueling the ongoing student protests are among concerns raised amid unrest in universities that are now threatening to bring the country to its knees. This week, we saw some major destruction of property at certain institutions, and this has led to the closure of some campuses indefinitely. Gentlemen, I think this week we were pretty shocked by the lawlessness and the major destruction of property that accompanied some protests. But now, do you think that this has betrayed the legitimate cause of demanding lower fees at universities? Let's start with you, Chris.
Well, not all the protests are linked to fees. Some of them are linked to recognition of
insourcing
the EFF,
as well,
etc., and insourcing. I think that I remember having a conversation with you last year around fees must fall. And my view then, and it still is, that there's no short-term solution to this thing. There's no quick fix that's going to pull it together. I think what's concerning is that there doesn't seem to be a solution, that we've been told that there are commissions of inquiry and there's additional funding, etc. That hasn't been delivered. The university managements themselves still seem to be really struggling financially with insourcing and with the level of fees that are being charged. And they're not able to communicate that to the students, and the students get unhappy. Another concern is that increasingly, I think the state and some of the campuses are looking at security solutions rather than university management solutions. And it's difficult when you're in the university management and you've got a lot of students who are protesting, or you've got white students attacking black students, very volatile situations. It's very difficult then to come with a kind of consensus-based approach when temperatures are so high. But I think too easily, the police and private security firms are being brought in, and they don't provide solutions. They provide additional problems because they make students even angrier. They create a bad perception for the campuses. That really is the conversation that needs to be happening. What's the long-term solution to the university funding issue? Not just additional money for NSFAS, but a proper solution. Maybe we should be talking about free university education for everyone who needs it, who cannot afford it. Secondly, how universities deal with issues of student participation. If the EFF wins an SRC election, you cannot say, we're not going to recognize you because we don't like you. Yeah, you have to recognize the right of people to organize. And thirdly, this securitization issue, that it's very problematic to keep calling in the cops and calling in security firms when there's a problem. We've seen what happened in Northwest University. You see the impact in the Free State where black students are charged by police and white students are left alone. All it does is reinforce that perception of inequality and unfairness. And, you know, it needs cool heads, and I know it's only February, but unless it's dealt with now, this issue is just going to drag on and on for the rest of the year. And the losers are the students, their parents who've worked incredibly hard, their families who are also affected by this. It really has a ripple effect. Northwest University in Makhanya has shown it's not just the campus that's affected. The entire community develops a sense of irritation, anger, becomes positional, and you can't go into the local government election when you've got 14, 15 campuses in major centres where there's this level of discontent.
Look, Chris, very interesting. Sorry, Aldrin, very interesting that you mentioned that there's no intervention as so far. I had Glenda Daniels of Wits last week, and she said there's no current government intervention on the latest protest. But, I mean, how long is this then going to go on, Aldrin? We certainly need a solution.
Yeah, no, we certainly do. Just a quick one on, on what Chris said. And, sorry. On Friday as well, the Nelson Mandela Foundation, as well as various other civil rights organizations, have come together. They've set up a forum where they want to mediate, because they said that's what's currently lacking in the impasse and the standoff between university management as well as the students. And now, as we've seen as well, now we have clashes between different race groups at universities, and then that unfolded at the University of the Free State. And what the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation said, that with bringing in the police and bringing in private security, is that what should not be seen as a policing black anger. And that for me was really deep.
What do you think about that?
No, I
Chris?
agree. And I think particularly in the Free State, it was very obvious from social media, from what was being posted, what was seen on TV, very obvious that the police were biased. You you look at the sequence. A group of students go into a pitch to protest. A group of white students march them, beat them up, chase them to different parts of the campus. The police are supposed to separate. They're not to pursue one group and protect the other. It doesn't create the impression of equity, doesn't create the impression of fairness, and all it does is just divide that campus even more. But we've seen from Marikana and other instances that the police are not necessarily trained to deal with conflict. They're trained to deal aggressively with particular kinds of political expression, but I don't think they necessarily have the training to do it. Private security firms are even worse. If you look at the level of training that private security firms get, and a lot of them are ex-policemen.
They go there to engage.
Yeah, and they have testosterone running through their bodies. They don't have an engagement type mentality. The police don't do it. The private security firms aggravate it. I think we need to look at new solutions for dealing with that. And ultimately, I think it goes back to how the universities manage the conflict that starts to exist. Free State is ironic because Professor Janssen has been one of the most outspoken about the work that he's tried to do in terms of bringing students of different race groups together. That whole thing has just collapsed with one incident, right? So his credibility is on the line, the initiatives that he's put in place are on the line. I don't know where you take that level of disgruntlement and level of unhappiness, compounded by police brutality, compounded by the absence of national government. There was a campaign on social media this week to say, where is Minister Bladen Zimande? I think people are feeling his absence. He's doing a very interesting social media experiment tomorrow where you can ask him questions.
Yes, you also did it on Friday. Yes.
I don't think a tweet is going to deal with the situation. I think this needs a much more thorough engagement. He sent his deputy minister to Northwest University. He hasn't been visible himself on the campuses where there's some really ugly situations. And sure, you don't want to undermine university management, but you also need to realize this is a national issue, the national challenge. Racism is really coming to the fore as a social issue. If you remember, I'll be very brief. 9 months ago, we were talking about we've won our political freedom, it's now about economic freedom. The Fees Must Fall movement, the Racism Must Fall movements have shown that we haven't got our political freedom yet. Until we deal with these issues of inequality and racism, they're going to keep flaring up.
All right, let's wrap it up there on the student protest and move on to our next topic now. Well, this year's budget speech was applauded by many. However, low economic growth projections could hinder Minister Pravin Gordhan's good intentions unless everybody tightens their belts, as he advised. Here's what the minister said.
Honourable Speaker, our economic imperative is to ignite inclusive growth. This is central for jobs, for lowering debt, for delivering services, and building infrastructure for a 21st century economy. Let us chart a new course for the economy and the well-being of all South Africans, particularly for those hardest hit by unemployment, the low-skilled and the youth. This is not only crucial to address social imbalances and inequality, it is also fundamental to encouraging investment.
For this discussion, all the way in our Cape Town studios is economist Ms. Thabi Leoka. Thabi, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us on Media Monitor.
It's a pleasure.
Look, Thabi, what was your holistic analysis of the minister's budget in brief?
I think that, the minister is between a rock and a hard place, and he had to do the best with the, limited resources that he had.
All right. Look, now, I'd like to pick your brain a little, if you allow me. Here are some opposing or different views that I came across, and I'd like you to tell us if jointly, do they not all have a point for us to ponder upon? Now, these views were, of course, from the conversation. And, of course, we're starting with Leon Schreiber, who argued that Gordhan's budget is sure to placate the governing African National Congress's political allies ahead of the local government elections. But it's doubtful whether the speech included enough concrete steps to end the prevailing negative sentiment about the country's economy. Keith Goshak takes a different view because he believes that Gordhan dispensed exactly what the credit agencies were watching for by cutting the wasteful expenditure and putting a freeze on hiring the public in the public sector. And of course, last but not least, Carmen S. Christian points out that spending on health took a bit of a backseat given other pressing demands such as the issue we've been talking about, education.
Yeah, there have been varied, views, And it's interesting because the market, viewed it quite negatively and a little bit surprising. And I think that the market expected a bit of increases, especially on the revenue side of the budget. And so, VAT was not announced. A 1% increase in VAT is about, the minister could get about 15 billion rand. So that's quite a significant amount. I hear what people are saying, but you can't, I think the minister cannot, make everyone happy. He did, lower the spending ceiling by about 10 billion rand, which was quite significant. He did announce that there would be job freezes. This was announced last year, but this time he said that even vacant positions in government will not be filled. So, we could see a significant amount of people not, or at least the government reducing hiring quite significantly. If you look at the wage bill, it is a significant part of the budget, and it has been increasing quite substantially over the years, bringing a risk to our fiscus. And, the one quick solution would be to shrink our government. He's tried various ways. I know that even some municipalities will be closing. So, it is a very tough position for him to be in, given the financial constraints. So I think that the rating agencies will be looking at how. Not less so in the speech itself, because the speech does outline, it does lay out some of the things that we plan to do, but will we be able to achieve it as another thing altogether, especially given how slow our GDP growth is. So, the rating agencies review South Africa in June and also in December. And I think we're still at a risk of being downgraded either in June or December.
Look, Ntabi, speaking of fiscus, now looking at fiscal consolidation, the effect on investments and the newly introduced cost-cutting initiatives and the continuing tax uncertainties, as well as the issue of retirement funds and, of course, the freeze on some government posts were some points that people wanted a little more clarity on. Briefly give us your outlook on this.
That's correct. A lot of people wanted, granularity on how he would do this. I think that, if you look at the actual budget review, which is a bigger booklet, it does have a detail on how the government plans on doing this. I think in the speeches, the president, the finance minister is limited. He's only given an hour to outline what is in the budget review itself, which is a bigger document that has better detail, more detail on how the government plans on reducing spending, increasing some taxes, also making sure that we don't bridge the spending ceiling.
All right, and last but not least, Tabi, what impact do you think the budget is going to have, especially on the poor?
I think that he was very lenient on the poor. And, he didn't increase VAT, for instance. What we also saw was that the finance minister increased social grants, which was a little surprising. I didn't expect him to do that, given our financial constraints. I actually thought that he would there'd be no increase in social spending. We would see a little bit of an increase in VAT. South Africa still has a very low tax base if you compare it to our peers, emerging market peers. We still have to go through a very tough period for us to start seeing sustained growth, and that's my worry, that we're fearful of reform, and reform will be difficult for everyone, not just the poor, but the whole economy has to reform so that we employ more people, we educate more people, and that is a slow process. But ultimately, in the long run, we will start seeing the returns of a very tough period. And I think that we are just kicking the can down the road, not really wanting to reform or not wanting to hurt certain constituencies, but they will be hurt if we do get downgraded.
Thank you so much for your time here on Media Monitor, Ntabi, and thank you for joining us and breaking down the budget speech for us. That is Ms. Thabi Leoka, an economist at Argon Asset Management, and she joined us from our Cape Town studios. Coming up after the break, of course, we're going to take a look at what's coming up next, and that is the South African Post Office, the embattled South African Post Office, still under the spotlight, as well as the e-tolls. Do stay with us. This is Media Monitor.
Big news is Newsroom.
We also stream live on YouTube.
Whether you're at home, at the office, or at the gym, wherever you are, Newsroom is right there with you. Bringing you all the latest news, updates, sports, weather, and everything in between. Get all the latest news you need on the go via live streaming on our YouTube channel. That's Newsroom, weekdays at 9 a.m. only on the SABC News Channel.
Controlesa is actually stirring the pot here.
I'm sure they've been consulted as Controlesa. They did not see a snake. Now that in certain areas there are certain benefits that might possibly be accruing, there is a snake, now we need to reverse the process.
I agree, but it is not above the sovereignty of the people. The very same court you're talking about.
The sovereignty of the people, probably you should explain that to me.
The sovereignty of the people is above everything.
It is not proper the way facts are presented to the public. Are you in contact with Khosekgolo Motshodi?
He was kicked out by the court because he wanted to be amicus curiae.
For your weekly dose of all things legal, join Dumile Mateza every Sunday at 2 p.m. only on SABC News Channel.
Welcome back. As promised, we're now talking big stories of the week, and you can be part of that conversation on Twitter at SA Media Monitor. Now, the South African Post Office is another parastatal that has come under the spotlight following the Public Protector's report on corruption amounting to 22 million rands related to the procurement of its headquarters. Gentlemen, it seems the South African Post Office is on its knees. Do you think, though, the appointment of Mark Barnes as CEO will change things around? Let's start with you, Chris. What do you think?
I don't think one person can turn that place around. I mean, I think if he's smart, he's going to bring in a team. He's going to look at the different areas of operation. But the Post Office's biggest problem seems to be governance, not management, and particularly in relation to the board, as with many other SOEs. So I'm sure that one of the biggest challenges Mr. Barnes is going to face is how to deal with the board, how to make sure that they handle governance properly and leave running the business to him. But secondly, the Post Office is different from other SOEs in that it's in a dying market segment. We'll always need aeroplanes, we'll probably always need electricity, but are we always going to need the Post Office? If its core business remains the moving of post around, it has no future. I mean, I don't know when you last wrote a letter, or Aldrin, but the reality is that is not a sustainable part of the business. So in the same way that Telkom has had to modernize and look at other ways of becoming an SOE that is in touch with what the needs of the community are, the needs of society, and the needs of business, it is going to be difficult for anyone to turn it around. What's interesting, though, is that there's a lot. It has competitors now, which it never had before. Yes. Postnets and these little courier shops and little photocopy shops, etc. So even there, its core business is kind of being eaten away. The challenge, though, is digital migration. The delivery of set-top boxes to 5.5 million poor people is a key challenge that the Post Office has to deal with. In a way, it's given it a new business venture, which might give it new momentum and might change the way it operates. But if it gets it wrong, people aren't going to be able to watch TV. 5 million people are going to be very angry with the Post Office. You've already got business angry because bills don't get delivered and newspapers don't get delivered, etc. So it's a very difficult time, I think, for the institution. And the Public Protector's report has covered one corruption allegation brought by the Communication Workers Union. There are others, there are a lot of others that are affecting that entity. So it's going to have instability in terms of management and governance, business future challenges, and a particularly big challenge in terms of digital migration, which it might not be able to deliver on. That's a hard job, even for Mark Barnes.
I actually think that his biggest challenge right now, because the Post Office is now in that phase of transforming its business strategy.
Yes.
And the big focus now going forward is Postbank So his biggest challenge would be, how do we make sure that Postbank becomes commercially viable and is able to compete with the big fives like Standard Bank and so forth? But at the same time, how do you make sure that that this public entity operates like a private or competes with private institutions, and yet you have a situation where you find unions playing a big role in what happens within the operations of public entities and so forth? We know, for instance, that the Communication Workers Union were very happy with the report released by the Public Protector, and they say they've been vindicated. The other issue that the Public Protector also raised is the use of labor brokers, which has been a huge issue for unions. And I guess going forth in terms of political discussions and so forth, this report will definitely play a big role when the alliance partners sit down and discuss what will happen to labor brokers and so forth. We know that the ANC has said that, listen, we're going ahead with labor brokering. It would be unconstitutional to stop any company from operating as long as it is as long as it's not unconstitutional or they don't break any laws. We can't stop them from operating.
But gentlemen, speaking of transformation, I mean, we have to keep in mind that there's so many jobs that are going to be lost here. Then can't we speak about the post office being consolidated into a smaller, already existing department of government? I mean, surely.
Well, I think it's part of the conversation around whether you privatize state-owned entities, whether you in full, whether you privatize parts of it, or whether you keep it as a completely state-owned entity. And Minister Lynn Brown's been quite creative in terms of how to do that, and I mean creative in a positive way. I think it would be interesting to look at what happens to the post office, whether it keeps particular core businesses, whether other issues are expanded or not. As it's ripe for experimentation. The difficulty with any transformation exercise is how you keep the plane flying while you're trying to fix it.
Yes.
And particularly in an economic environment like now, where people are trying to cut costs, it is much cheaper to send emails. It's much cheaper to bank with some banks than it is with Postbank. So it's going to enter a competitive environment, and it won't be in a particularly strong competitive position initially. The other difficulty is whenever you hear about these turnaround strategies, the first thing is, this is how much money we need to do it, right? I mean, we've heard from Mark Mars, we need a few billion on the table to sort it out. I'd rather the conversation be that this is how much we can save, this is what we can achieve if we do the following. Why do we have to keep pumping money into SOEs to save them if it's quicker, simpler and cheaper to just get them out of the way?
All right, and that's where we end our discussion on SAPO. Moving on now to our next story. Sanral is working on new tactics to punish motorists who do not pay their e-tolls. Selling your car is going to be rather hard, as vehicles will now be put on a database showing all outstanding debts. The e-toll debt currently stands at 5.2 billion rand. Aldrin, I mean, you covered the story last year. What do you think about the latest tries from Sanral to try and get motorists to pay? It seems people are not heeding the call.
Yes, people are not heeding the call quite clearly. If you look at that bill, 5.2 billion. Clearly, Gauteng motorists are not as optimistic as Sanral seems to be. And you know, every time that they release these statements and they say they'll be doing this and will be doing that to make sure that motorists pay, or sometimes they go and say like, no, actually Gauteng motorists are paying their e-tolls. But clearly, looking at that bill, that's not the case. I think if you look at what happened, was it last year when the Deputy President, Cyril Ramaphosa, announced that going forward there will be, I think the cap is 500 if I'm not mistaken. The monthly cap is now 500. But when you want to renew your license disc, you must have paid up all your debt. So this, all the amounts the outstanding debt that you owe Sanral. So this, I think, is just a step forward in terms of making sure or compelling the motorists to pay. I don't know if that will see the light of day, because it has to go through all the political channels and so forth. And we know that COSATU is up in arms, but they are fighting a losing battle, it would seem, as well.
Chris, are you going to be paying your e-tolls? What do you think about this?
No comments. For me, this is a fascinating exercise in social engineering, right? Sanral is spectacularly failing in winning public support. Everything it does, it just seems to alienate people even more and more. And I think for an entity which relies on public participation and public support, it's going about it the wrong way, number one. Number two, the reference Aldrin made to that you have to pay your e-tolls before you can renew your licenses. There are legal contests around that. It's not legal, right? So Sanral announces it's given up on the carrot. It's now going for the stick. It's going to beat us into submission. Here comes the first stick. it's not legal. I don't know if the second stick is legal either, whether they can create this database. I don't know what the privacy laws say. I'm sure there are going to be people within outer and other institutions who are going to challenge this one too. And I think maybe it's time to just say, okay, well, maybe a complete amnesty. Maybe we start from fresh, not even carrying over or reducing your old debt. Just a complete amnesty that says, we're on your side, we need to pay for these roads, we're going to lose a bit of money in the process, but a fresh approach rather than this big stick that is coming down time and again.
And we shouldn't forget the political implications that e-tolls has had for the ANC.
Tell us more about that. What do you think, especially going into local government elections, Aldrin?
Well, you know, speaking to a lot of analysts, they've been saying that, listen, local government elections are about the roads, they're about water and so forth. They're about what affects me at a household level. But politically speaking, when opposition parties go out campaigning, we know, for instance, the EFF were chanting at the Gauteng legislature when Premier David Makhanya was delivering his State of the Province address that e-tolls must fall. So this national issue will definitely become something that they use heading into the municipal elections. And I'm for sure one of those campaigns that we will be seeing is the one that the DA launched, remember, before the 2014 elections, when they put up the big billboards that e-tolls proudly brought to you by the ANC.
All right. Well, now most news people were glued to their screens wanting to know the outcome of the Nokuthula Smelane case. If you missed it, we have it. Stay right there. A very good afternoon. You're watching the Midday Report.
Lunchtime news amplified.
But for now, this is what they call home. Their hope to shift to a higher ground seems to be against the tide.
Midday Report provides you with more than just news stories.
I just want Port Elizabeth to know that they own a world-class theatre.
Good afternoon. You're with the news at 1 in the headlines.
Very good afternoon to you. This is News Live. I'm Natasha Thorpe. Let's take a quick look at what's coming up in your headlines.
Good afternoon and welcome to A View from the House.
For all things news, tune in to Midday Report weekdays at 12 noon only on the SABC News channel.
As stories are broken around the world, SABC makes sure you do not miss out. As the stories unfold throughout the day, News at 8 updates all newsworthy stories worldwide. Globally, we are there. Locally, we leave no story untold. Make a date with News at 8 every Saturday and Sunday on SABC News, Africa's news leader.
Yes, you're watching Media Monitor. Welcome back, and you can still share your views on Twitter on our discussions. Now, the 4 apartheid officers accused of murdering Nokuthula Smelane were granted bail of 500 rand each by the Pretoria Regional Court earlier this week. Smelane was abducted and tortured by the police's security branch back in 1983 at the tender age of 23, and her remains have never ever been found. Chris, what do you make of the court's granting bail to the accused? I mean, a lot of MK veterans that were gathered, they were not happy with what transpired in court.
I don't think it's the real issue. I think the real issue is that these guys are on trial. Bail is not an indication of the severity of the case. It's essentially a mechanism to lock you in to the court process. I think we should rather wait and see what the response of the family and MK veterans is when this trial comes to an end. Because it has many, many challenges. You know, there were confessions made by these security policemen at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which cannot be used in the court case, which creates a very particular legal challenge for the state, because Nokuthula Simelane is by no means the only person who disappeared at the hands of the security police. There are hundreds of people who are still missing. So if the state is to successfully prosecute, it's going to have to go through exactly the same process as it's going through with these 4 individuals. Lots of years of research, bring them to trial, accept that they're going to go out on bail, accept that they're going to come back and they're going to face the full might of the law. I think it's a very important case in terms of healing, because you know the TRC was a very successful process from one point of view.
And I think that's the big question, Chris. Everybody's asking, didn't the TRC play its role in trying to hash out what really happened to Nokuthula?
I don't think it could have, because there were so many elements. The TRC had a very particular process, and I think they were trying to find the balance between truth and reconciliation, and maybe the balance sometimes went too much towards reconciliation and not towards the truth, number one. But number two, if you are a family member and went through that TRC process, I mean, I've seen the Goniwe family, Fort Kalata's family, they have some degree of closure, but I think they would much rather have preferred prosecution, particularly of people where there's evidence of murder, abduction. I mean, what they did to her, the security police would probably argue, was part of the way that they operated.
Yes.
They were inhumane, they neglected the value of human life completely. Now we've got to the stage where a court of law is going to decide, was it right or was it wrong?
Well, the family says until they find her body, nothing new has come out of the case, so they are not satisfied. All right, let's move on to other quick stories now from the continent. The AU is strengthening its efforts to find a lasting solution to the problems faced by Burundians. This week, President Jacob Zuma led a high-level delegation of African Union leaders to Burundi that interacted with all the stakeholders of the East Central country that is riddled with conflict. I mean, what needs to happen in Burundi for the government to accept aid to try and stabilize the country there, Aldrin?
Do you know what? On the Burundi issue, I have to admit I'm still torn between these two things, because first of all, you have a constitutional court that ruled that the president is allowed to go for a third term. And then on the other hand, you have the AU that says that no, Pierre Nkurunziza should step down. Is that really the solution? Because listen, you've got a constitutional court that said, yes, this guy can continue. Who are you as the AU to tell the president, no, you must actually step down, you're in violation of the Constitution, where the Constitutional Court is the Constitutional Court is saying something else. We know that there have been a lot of other interventions that the AU has tried.
Yes.
In December as well, they sent an ultimatum to him that, listen, we're going to send in 5,000 peacekeepers, as they call them. We'll be sending in these 5,000 peacekeepers. They declined, and Pierre Nkurunziza said that will definitely not happen. The AU summit went ahead in January, and what I actually expected would be happening is that you'd find an AU probably looking at whether there should be sanctions against Burundi if they feel that all other efforts to find a solution in Burundi have not worked.
Look, I know President Pierre Nkurunziza is always pledging when he refuses aid that the country is a sovereign country. I mean, what do you think then should be done to try and bring stability to that country?
If I knew, I would be there. I think, as Aldrin says, it is so complex because in a sense you've got a country that is really grappling with itself. It's grappling with itself on a whole lot of issues, the levels of violence, the levels of poverty. And if you you parachute in 200 people, that's the proposal now, 100 military advisors, 100 human rights advisors, and they are resisted by the head of state at the time. I mean, in a sense, you could be creating more problems than solutions. Sanctions might work, but sanctions essentially are going to punish the people of Burundi. That's the difficulty that you have. It really is a conundrum, and it's one that Burundi there has to be some level of maturity, I think, among the leadership there, and a letting go of some of the problems that they've created.
And probably acknowledging that there is a problem, because that's the other thing. When you speak to Pierre Nkurunziza, his deputies, they seem to have the belief that there is no problem in Burundi, and that the only violence is only in Bujumbura. And it's being, as they say, it's being shown by the media as if the entire country is being faced by this violence.
You must really accept the truth as to what's going on. Well, let's take a quick look now at what you've said on Twitter on some of our discussions today. And I can't see the name there, but somebody there says, obviously, there are third forces here pushing their own agendas. That's in relation to the university protest. Mr. John Thorpe says, expel the violent protesters, put them in prison, and most importantly, keep them there. That'll end things quickly. Wow. The president says he should have put more focus on the training of South African black academics. The ones present are aging. Last but not least, Petunia says, increase the percentage of disabled people in government and in the private sector. Well, that's where we leave it with Media Monitor today. Let me thank my studio guests for making their time and valuable input on the show today. Please note that the views expressed on Media Monitor do not reflect the SABC's, but the actual person airing them. We are available on social and digital media platforms. I'm Alicia Jali. This is SABC News. Have yourself a fantastic day further.